Akira The Don.
He's got clout.
You look across the history of ideas, you find out that an idea is considered true for a long period of time, and then something comes along that it can't explain and blows its substructure out, and we have to recreate another knowledge structure. What you want to know about knowing isn't the facts that you know. What you want to know are the facts about how you come to know. The child was engaged continually in an exploratory relationship with the world. And so the child, through its actions, was generating information. And out of that information, producing the world of perception and producing their own psyche. Substrata of the world was information. And in interacting with that information, you make the world and you make yourself. You make the world and you make yourself. To me, the process is indistinguishable from mythological representations of the hero. Because the hero is exactly the same entity. St. George goes out beyond the confines of the community, so outside the knowledge structure, confronts the unknown, which has this dragon-like, predatory face. Because throughout our evolutionary history, when we went outside the boundaries of what we knew, we ran into predators of all sorts. It's the predator's detection system in our mind that represents the unknown for us. That's where the symbols come from. The dragon is something that has a treasure. It's either a virginal woman or a hoard of gold. That's exactly the paradoxical situation that human beings face, is when we go out into the unknown. It's a terrible predatory danger that holds the promise of everything. The deep myths and the deep religious structures basically tell people, get a grip and be a hero. Get a grip and be a hero. Get a grip and be a hero. Get a grip and be a hero.
The hero myth basically says, go out there. Confront the dragon, get the gold. Confront the dragon, get the gold. Confront the dragon, get the gold. Share it with the community. Confront the dragon, get the gold. Confront the dragon, get the gold. Confront the dragon, get the gold. Share it with the community. Confront the dragon, get the gold. Confront the dragon, get the gold. Confront the dragon, get the gold. Share it with the community. Confront the dragon, get the gold. Confront the dragon, get the gold. Confront the dragon, get the gold. Share it with the community. And live properly. The alternative is face the tyrant, enter the desert as a consequence because everything falls apart, recast structure, find the promised land. Find the promised land. Those are the two elements to the hero myth. And that's divine. Closest thing to divine that we know. You might say, well, what happens if you follow the divine path? And the answer might be, well, everything turns out perfectly because God is on your side. It's like, no. That isn't what happens because things don't turn out perfectly. It's your best bet. It's your best strategy. You know, dragons wouldn't be dragons if they couldn't eat you. But that's okay. You know, God calls people to the adventure of their lives. And so you could say in part, God is that force within you which calls you to the adventure of your life. And says, get away from your family, get away from your blind and unconscious comfort, and get the hell out there in the world. Well, God calls Abraham out from his fathers where he stayed far too long and from his kin where it's secure. And like the first thing he encounters is a famine, and then he encounters a tyranny inhabited by people who want to steal his wife. It's like you think, well, Abraham should have just stayed in bed and ignored God. Obviously. Well, that isn't how it is. It's like we're built for struggle, us human beings. You're not after the bubbles of bliss that Dostoevsky described in Notes from Underground. We're built to contend with the world. We're built to contend with reality. You want a challenge, because a challenge fortifies you. So you don't want to be secure, you want to be strong. And you get strong by taking on optimal challenges. And so you lay out your destiny in the world, and you take the slings and arrows of fate. And you make yourself stronger while you're doing so. And you might fail, and fortune might do you in. But it's your best bet. People have extracted unbelievable successes out of catastrophic failures. And I'm not saying that in a naive way. I know perfectly well what happens to people. You know, you're doing fine in life and then you get cancer. You're doing fine in life and then you get cancer. And then 6 months later you're dead. And all the heroism in the world isn't going to save you at that point. That's not the point. That's not the point. That's not the point. Life is bounded by mortality, but that doesn't mean that you don't get out there and contend. That's not the point. And you develop by contending, and you minimize the net amount of suffering in the world. That's not the point. And that's something, man. That's something to do. It beats laying in your basement and getting bitter and then doing the terrible things that bitter people do. You can play your role to the best of your ability, and that will be good enough. So it isn't that you can avoid catastrophe, it's that you can prepare yourself to deal with it honorably when it arrives. That's what you've got. You cite a tired brain, foggy thinking, as the reason to stop answering questions or giving a talk. How do you combat this while working or writing daily? Well, I eat a big breakfast relatively soon on waking. That really helps. If any of you out there are anxious, and many of you no doubt are, there'll be a large number of you who are anxious and don't eat breakfast. And there'll be a whole bunch of you out there who think, well, I don't eat breakfast, it isn't necessary. It's like, that's wrong. It's necessary. You fasted all night. If you load yourself cognitively or physiologically in the morning, your brain, stressed, will encourage your body to produce insulin. It will take all the blood sugar out of your blood, and then you're done for the day. And then you'll be anxious. If you're anxious, try this. It's really, really interesting experiment. The next time you're anxious, go eat something. Eat something substantial, a piece of meat, a piece of cheese, and peanut butter, something like that. And then wait 10 minutes and see if you're less anxious. And try that for like 2 weeks. Every time you get anxious, eat something. Because then you can find out if your anxiety is linked to low blood sugar. And it's very likely that it is, especially if you also get irritable and foggy in your thinking. The best way to treat that, as far as I've been able to tell, and there's a decent literature on this, is to make sure that you eat a big breakfast. And you might say, well, I'm not hungry in the morning. It's like, who the hell cares if you're hungry? I didn't say enjoy your breakfast. I said eat it. That's not the same thing. There's lots of things that you need to do that you don't enjoy to begin with. You'll get hungry in 6 months, and then you'll start to enjoy it. So that's a massive difference. I take small naps quite frequently. If I'm wiped out, I'll go have a nap for 10 minutes or 15 minutes. That helps quite a lot. I try to wake up on a fairly regular schedule. Fix your wake time. When you sleep, that's not so important. So you can still, you know, stay up late and have fun and all that. But getting up in the morning is really helpful. So, nap, make sure you eat, and make sure you eat protein and fat and not carbohydrates, because carbohydrates are basically poisonous. And make sure that you get enough sleep. That's how I combat it and try to make myself hyper efficient, which is also a really interesting thing to try. I was talking to my agents at CAA, Creative Artists Agency in LA, and and we're trying to think about our overarching philosophy, you know. And I first proposed to the CAA guys that our overarching philosophy would be something like to educate as many people as possible in the shortest period of time. It seems like a really good goal. Like, why the hell not do that? But then we broadened that a little bit this week, which was to try to do as much good possible as efficiently as possible. And that efficiency thing is really fun. If you guys who are listening are out for a challenge, one of the things that you can, I think this heightens the meaning in your life, is to try to do difficult things, right? Aim high. Don't aim so damn high you can't manage it. Aim high. Make sure you break down your aims into reasonably attainable sub-goals. Aim high. And then you want to see how hyper-efficient you can get. Aim high. Discipline yourself. Think, okay, how much work can I do if I load myself right to the maximum? How hard can I work until I exhaust myself? And then you back off, obviously, because the optimal amount of working, productive engagement, let's say, is that which is sustainable across decades. You have to learn that, but you don't learn that without stretching yourself to your limits to begin with. If your life isn't everything it could be, and if you're suffering from an excess of meaninglessness, it means you're not oriented in the world of chaos and order properly. You could learn to discipline yourself, figure out what it is that you need to do and that you want to do, and then see how efficient you can get. One of the things that's quite fun is to figure out, if you have a task that you have to do, it's really interesting to spend a few minutes, sometimes hours, depending on how long the task is. See if you can figure out how to do it from 5 to 10 times faster. It means you'll have to rearrange the way you think about it, but you can often do it. And that's how extremely productive people get so hyper efficient. You know, sometimes it means you have to delegate, sometimes it means you have to bring other people aboard. That's delegation as well, I suppose. There's a lot of preconceptions that you hold about who you are and who the world is that you could dispense with that would make you a way more efficient actor in the world. People aren't taught that comparing what we have to their hypothetical, ideologically motivated utopia is actually a bad idea. It just isn't difficult to take a look at a system like our system and say, well, look at all the problems it has compared to a hypothetical system that doesn't have any problems at all. It's like, well, yeah, man. You've taken like 99% of the fish out of the ocean, and the degree to which our current level of economic activity is truly sustainable without alteration is at least debatable, even though I don't think it's nearly as terrible as people make it out to be. I don't think it's disputable that our current socioeconomic structures are the most productive and the most free structures that have ever been produced by people anywhere in the world. And one of the things you can say about capitalism and free enterprise and the Western stress on individuality is that even though it does produce inequality, all systems produce inequality. This is something very fundamental. Inequality is the rule. You can't posit a value without producing a hierarchy. Because you posit a value, say this is worth doing. Everyone says, yeah, this is worth doing. Well, then what happens automatically is that it turns out that some people are better at doing it than other people. No matter what it is. If you're going to posit a value, which you have to do if you're going to act, then immediately you create a hierarchy. And you also build into the value claim, the claim that A is better than B. You also build into that the idea that if A is better than B, then people who are doing better at A should be differentially rewarded compared to people who aren't. There's no way around that if you're going to play the game.
Maybe you're 35 years old and you've never had a job. And one of the things that's stopping you is that you're so damn nervous that you can't pick up a phone and use it. Because if anything unexpected happens while you're talking, you get scared so badly you have to hang up. And so that would be characteristic of somebody with a severe anxiety disorder. So what do you do with that person? So you say, are they afraid of the phone? Well, no. What are they afraid of? Well, they're afraid of anomalies in human interaction, right? They're afraid of something unexpected happening while they're trying to impose a structure. And the reason they're afraid of that is because they never learned that they were capable of dealing with the emergence of something new on an ongoing basis, which meant that, well, in all likelihood that when they were children, they were so sheltered from any contact with those aspects of being that transcend knowledge that they never learned that there was something inside of them that would reveal itself if they were allowed the opportunity to encounter the unknown. Encounter the unknown. Encounter fear, then to master it, then to extract out something of value. So they can't get a job because they can't use the phone. And it isn't because they can't use the phone, right? It's a deeper story than that. It's because they're terrified of this, and they have no idea that they have some resource they could draw on to combat it. And you could say, well, we can teach them to use the phone, right? Say, well, you know, here's a repertoire of stock lines that you might use, you know, like small talk at a party. And that would increase what they know and enable them to deal with the unknown. Or you could say, look, you know, relax a little bit. When the person says something on the phone that you don't understand, pause a little bit. Think about what they're saying. Pay attention to them. Allow yourself the luxury of formulating a response. You'll do fine. And even if you do it badly the first half a dozen times, well, you'll learn eventually. The person derives from that the notion that not only can they cope on the phone, but that possibly there's more to them than originally met the eye.
Akira The Don.
The one thing that seems to compete with the idea of the spoken word as the source of the extraction of habitable order from chaos is the eye, is the capacity to pay attention. Marduk, for example, the Mesopotamian creator god, who emerged in the hierarchy of Mesopotamian gods and came out at the top. He was the victor of the gods. He had eyes all the way around his head, and he could speak magic words. And I really like that. I really like that idea. And the Egyptians developed that idea too. Their god Horus was the eye. Everyone knows the eye of Horus. That image is so compelling that we still know about. Everybody has seen the eye of Horus with a really open pupil. The open eye was what revivified the dead society. It's so smart. So what do you do if your life isn't in order? Bloody well pay attention. And that isn't the same as thinking. It's a different process. Thinking is like the imposition of structure in some sense. I know I'm oversimplifying, but paying attention is something like watching for what you don't know. One of the things I often recommend to my clinical clients if they're having trouble with a family member is, number one, shut up.
shut up. Don't tell them anything about yourself. And I don't mean in a rude way, it's just like, no more personal information. Number 2, watch them like a hawk and listen.
I guess this is the end. Looking back, my life has been nothing but failure. The tale of Jiraiya the Gallant.
And if you do that long enough, they will tell you exactly what they're up to. And they will also tell you who they think you are. And then you'll be shocked because they think you're something, generally speaking, that's not like you are at all. And when they tell you, it's like a revelation to both of you. Attention is an unbelievably powerful force. You would not believe what people will tell you or reveal to you if you watch them as if you want to know, instead of watching them so that you'll have your prejudices reinforced. That's usually how people interact. I want to keep thinking about you the way I'm thinking about you. And so I'm going to filter out anything that disproves my theory. That's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm going to watch you and figure out what you're up to. Not in a rude way, none of that. I just want to see what's there. And that'll be good for you, probably. And also be good for me. And also be good for me. You tell your kids to play fair. You say, it's not whether or not you win, it's how you play the game. You say that and you don't really know what you mean. You feel kind of stupid saying it even though you know it's true. And your kid looks at you like there's something wrong with you because he doesn't know what you're talking about either. But you know it's true. And so here's why it's true. Life isn't a game, it's a set of games. And the rule is, never sacrifice victory across the set of games for victory in one game. Right? And that's what it means to play properly. You want to play so that people keep inviting you to play. Because that's how you win, right? You win by being invited to play the largest possible array of games. And the way you do that is by manifesting the fact that you can play in a reciprocal manner every time you play, even if there's victory at stake. And that's what makes you successful across time. And we all know that, and we even tell our kids that, but we don't know that we know it. And so we're not adapting ourselves to the game and victory in the game. We're adapting ourselves to the meta game and victory across the set of all possible games. And to act morally is not to win today's contest at the expense of the rest of possible contests. It's the key to success. The person who is the master at being invited to play the largest number of games is also the same person that goes out forthrightly to conquer the unknown before it presents itself as the enemy at the door. They're the same thing. Nietzsche said, you know, that a moral revelation was the consequence of a tremendously long process of initial construction and then formulation. Thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years of building custom before you get the revelation of the articulated law. And that's a description of the pattern that works. What's the pattern that works? It's the game that you can play with everybody else day after day with no degeneration.
And we'll never be as young as we are right now. And we'll
act in a way so that each action could become a universal rule. That was Kant's fundamental moral maxim, and Piaget put a twist on that. He said, no, that's not exactly it. It's act in such a way that it works for you now, and next week, and next month, and next year, and 10 years from now, and so that while it's working for you, it's also working for the people around you and for the broader society. It's the equilibrated state, and you could think about that as an intimation of the city of God on earth. And it's based on this idea that a morality has to be iterable. There's been lots of simulations online already, artificial intelligence simulations. People who've been studying the emergence of moral behavior, say in artificial intelligence systems, have already cottoned on to the idea that one of the crucial elements to the analysis of morality is iterability. You can't play a degenerating game because it degenerates. Like, obviously, you want to play a game that at least remains stable across time. And God, if you could really get your act together, maybe it would slowly get better. And of course, that's what you'd hope for your family, right? That's what you're always trying to do, unless you're completely hell-bent on revenge and destruction. It's like, is there a way that we can continue to play together that will make playing together even better the next day?
How can women who waited too long to have children find meaning in their lives once they realize their mistake? How can we cope with the regret? Jesus, that's a hard question. Maybe you try to forgive yourself a little bit. It's very difficult to go through life without regrets, without making mistakes. You know, and you can't beat yourself to death for it, because then everyone would beat themselves to death all the time. And so you think, well, I'm too soon old and too late wise, to use an old cliche. And you think, well, that's the lot of mankind. We learn things too late often, and that's too bad. And you forgive yourself because you're stupid and you don't know what you're doing and you're unwise just like everyone else. And maybe you're somewhat capable of learning if you're careful. It's like, people make mistakes, man. Big mistakes. And the people that I've watched through life that have been successful, it's not like they didn't make mistakes, because everyone makes mistakes and they do things they regret and they miss opportunities, and it's a bloody catastrophe. But they treat themselves with some degree of mercy along with the justice. It's like, yeah, well, I screwed up there, but I'm not going to beat myself to death so that I can't get up again. And so you do what you can to forgive yourself. You know, it's a confusing time to live in many ways, because we have the birth control pill now, and that means reproduction has now become voluntary. Well, when's a good time to reproduce? Well, never, because who would ever think about doing that? It's so ridiculously irrational and complicated, and the burden of responsibility is so insanely high, and you're never secure enough to have the proper place to bring children into the world. And you have to get your career going and your intimate relationship, and maybe you have some struggle doing that, and one day you wake up and it's a bit late. It's like, yeah, well, you're a product of your time, and that's a catastrophe, because to be a product of your time is in some ways a catastrophe. But there's other things to do in life, and auguring yourself into the ground with regret and self-recrimination is not useful, right? I mean, you have to learn your lesson, you have to take your lumps, all of that. But have some mercy, you know? That's it.
Come into the world equipped with an array of possibilities and limitations. Those possibilities and limitations are expressed most particularly in our physical form. The fact that we have a specific kind of embodied form that allows us to do certain things and that also doesn't allow us to do certain other things. Lao Tzu has pointed out that it's the space inside a pot that makes the pot worthwhile. What he means by that is that those things that limit you give you as much form and possibility as those things that enable you. What that means more broadly is the fact that you come to a given circumstance with a set of possibilities and a set of limitations. It's that allows you to impose form on what you encounter. So that the whole notion of form is attendant in some peculiar way that we don't really understand yet on the necessity of limitation. And I think the best way to understand that, or to begin to understand that, is to give some consideration to the notion of a game. So for example, if you're playing chess, there's a virtually unlimited number of things you can't do, and only a very narrow number of things that you can do. Yet when you're playing chess, the arbitrary limitations that are imposed on each piece don't seem to be unfair in any sort of cosmic sense. They seem to be part of the structure that enables you to actually play the game. Without the imposition of those rules, which are of course relatively arbitrary in their structure, there wouldn't be a game at all.
Let me tell you something you already know. The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows. It's a very mean and nasty place, and I don't care how tough you are, it will beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it. You, me, or nobody is gonna hit as hard as life. But it ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much it takes and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done.
One of the things that Piaget said about kids was that they first learn to play a game, but they don't know what the rules are. Meaning that if you have a bunch of kids together, they can play a game, but if you take one of the kids out of the game when they're young, say 6, and you say, what are the rules? They can only sort of give you a representation. So you take 6-year-old 1 and he'll tell you some of the rules, and 6-year-old 2 will tell you different rules, and 6-year-old 3 will tell you different rules, but if you put them all together, they can play. So they have the knowledge embodied either individually or in the group. The knowledge is there to be extracted. Well, then they get a little older, they can extract the rules. And then they start to play by the rules. And then Piaget's last step was, well, it isn't just that kids play by the rules, it's that they learn that they can make the rules. And he thought about that as moral progression. First you can play, then you can play by the rules. Then you learn, maybe, because he didn't think everyone learned this, that you're actually the master of the rules. That doesn't mean the rules are arbitrary, but it means that you can be the generator of the rules, assuming that you know how to play the game. And he thought about that as a moral progression. And then I thought, well, that's exactly what happened to Moses in the story of Exodus, because Moses is out there leading all those Israelites around, and like, they don't have a law, they don't have a lawgiver, they have a tradition. They're all like crabby because, well, they're in a desert. It's like they were in a tyranny, but now they're in a desert. It's like, that's no improvement. So they're really getting pretty bitchy about it. And so they're worshiping false idols and having one catastrophe after another. And they get Moses to judge their conflicts. And so he does that for God only knows how long. Forever. Crabby Israelites come to Moses and bitch at him. It's like, well, he did this and she did that. And so then he has to figure out how to make peace. And he does that so long that one of his, I think it's his father-in-law, tells him he has to stop doing it because he's going to exhaust himself. Well, then you think, well, what's happening? Well, and I'm not assuming that this is like a literal historical story. I think, again, it's a condensation. Well, any group has a set of customs, just like a wolf pack does. And so then the customs are being manifest, and someone who's a genius is watching and thinking, okay, well, what's the rule in this situation? What's the rule in this situation? What's the rule in this situation? And then in his imagination, the rules turn into a hierarchy, and then he goes up on the mountain and he goes bang, and he thinks, oh my God, here's the rules that we've been living by all this time. And that's the revelation of the commandments. Well, and you think, well, how else could it be? You think the rules came first and obeying them came second? It's like, no.
Or anybody. Cowards do that, and that ain't you. You're better than that.
There isn't any such thing as self-interest. It's not the right way to think about it, because you're not alone. Remember that Simpsons episode? Homer drank a quart of mayonnaise and vodka? and Marge and all his kids were telling him not to. And he said, well, that's a problem for future Homer. I sure don't envy that guy. Well, that's it, exactly. It's like, well, there isn't just you. There's now you, and there's tonight you, and there's tomorrow morning you. That's the one that'll have the hangover, by the way. There's next week you, and next month you, and next year you, and old you. So if you're going to act in your self-interest, you have to take that collective of yous across time into account when you make your decision. And now here's the cool thing about that. Future you and someone else that you have to live with right now that's not you are pretty much the same people. And so if you're going to act in your self-interest and you have other people around you, then you also want to act in their self-interest, because otherwise they won't like you, they won't cooperate with you, and they won't compete with you in a reasonable manner. And so that's going to be a catastrophe. And so you want to act out what's good for you now and what's good for you next month and next year. And you want to do that in a way that's good for you and your family and your community right now, next week, and next year. 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 And you're going to take all those things into account at the same time. That's an equilibrated game from a Piagetian perspective. And it was his idea that that constituted the basis for proper moral judgment. And it's a brilliant idea. It's a brilliant idea. And so that's your true self-interest. There's no difference between your interest and the interest of others. Not in any fundamental sense. Even your enemies, which is why you're enjoined to treat your enemy as if he was yourself. Because he is. Well, why? It isn't that you hope they get a bigger house than you. It's that, let's say you're being pursued and tormented by someone who's truly reprehensible. They have a miserable life, man, in all likelihood. Let's say they're truly malevolent. You know, they live in hell. And what you might hope for them is that they could figure out how to get out of there, because it's not good for them and it's not good for anyone else. Think, well, even your enemies, it's like, wouldn't it be good if they could get their act together and stop being so unnecessarily malevolent? The idea that your self-interest is somehow opposed to other people's, or that if you maximize your self-interest, you're not operating in the best interests of other people, is predicated on a poor idea of what constitutes your self-interest. Because you're not separate in any real sense from other people. Maybe not separate from everything in some real sense. Jung, in his book Mysterium Conjunctionis, he had this idea. I'm going to go through it real quick. It's a complicated idea. This is how you put yourself together. The first thing you do is you join your emotions and your rationality, so that your mind and your emotions are one thing. He called that the first conjunction. Your motivations and your emotions and the way that you think about the world are all acting in the same direction. That would mean incorporation of aggression and sexuality from a Freudian perspective. Those parts of you that are difficult to integrate come to be integrated into one thing. So you can use your anger when you need to. You have your sexuality under control. It doesn't have you, but you know how to use it, and it's a power for you. And you're properly assertive in all of those things. You build yourself into one psychological unit, and then you embody that. So that's the second conjunction. The second conjunction is take your mind, emotion, motivation, unity, and act it out. Act it out in the world, so that there's no distinction between you and what you do. Between you and the way you think about the world and your philosophy and how you act. That makes you a second kind of unity. And then the final conjunction, which is the most difficult one, is to stop thinking that the world is different than you are. This is why I ask people to clean up their rooms. It's like, your room is you. It's you. Your room is you. It's you. And so you go in there and you clean up your room. You're cleaning you up too, the same way. You're developing discipline. You're putting yourself in order. You're developing a vision of the future. You're figuring out how to dress. You're figuring out how to take care of your things. You're interacting with the microcosmos that you have in front of you and learning how to balance chaos and order. There's no difference between you and what's around you. And that's a very difficult thing to understand. So you want to act in a way that's good for you, but good for everything else at the same time. Our daughter ended her life at 24 due to depression.
If someone is determined to end their life, how can one change their mind?
Well, first of all, I'm very sorry about that. That's a terrible thing. Look, I had this friend. Sorry. There's been a lot of depression in our family, so it's a question that cuts close to the bone. Anyways, I had this friend, a friend of my parents, and her granddaughter committed suicide, you know. She was just beating herself up about that. What could have I done? What could have I done differently? This is the problem with suicide. It leaves everybody behind thinking, oh my God, what could have I done? I could have treated the person better. I could have listened. I could have been there. It's like, and she was just beating herself up about this, really feeling that she wasn't a useful person, that she'd failed as a grandmother. She was a really good person, you know. And so I went for a walk with her, and I said, and she's married, and she likes her husband, and he's a really good guy. And I said, look, you're blaming yourself for your granddaughter's suicide. It's like, are you blaming your husband? Are you sitting him down and telling him what a useless bastard he was as a grandfather because his granddaughter committed suicide and how he failed completely? She said, no, I'd never do that. So I said, well, don't do it to yourself. No. People, depression is a terrible thing. And many, many, many things cause it, and we don't understand. There's lots of reasons that people get depressed, and depressed people can go places that are so dark you just cannot imagine it. And it isn't necessarily the case that you can always rescue someone, you know. But drowning yourself in the aftermath of a suicide is not helpful. So there's a good room for self-forgiveness there, you know. I mean, maybe you did some things you shouldn't have done that were reprehensible and all of that, but you don't want to beat yourself up. Remember the presumption of innocence, right? Innocent until proven guilty. And you have to apply that to yourself. I think there are times when people are so depressed that there isn't anything that anyone can do. You know, and the depressed person thinks, and this is probably the worst part of it, the depressed person thinks, everywhere I look, it's nothing but catastrophe. I can't see any way out of it. I can't see any path forward whatsoever. And then they think as well, and maybe it's the combination of these two thoughts that really make people suicidal. It's like, it's hopeless. It isn't going to get any better. No matter where I turn, there's no escape. The suffering is unbearable. And I'm absolutely no use whatsoever to anyone. It would be better for everyone if I was just gone. Because if I'm not so much of a burden now that it's going to destroy their life, then I'm going to be that much of a burden in the future. And so it's hard to imagine what that's like for people, but it's dreadful. And there's lots of ways you get there. And so you can listen to people, you can desperately encourage them to seek the help they need. You know, like I've seen antidepressants work miracles on very, very many people. Now, they don't work for everyone, and they're not a panacea. You know, they have side effects and all of that, but one of the side effects of untreated depression is that you kill yourself, and there is no recovery from that, and the probability is actually rather high. Look, it isn't clean. You can't rescue everyone. People get sick and they die. And sometimes the way they die looks like it's depression. Depression is a multifaceted phenomenon. You can be there for them, you can listen, you can watch, you can intervene, you can try to understand, you can hold them accountable, you can do all of those things. But everyone has their own destiny, you know, and you're not omnipotent. And so sometimes a catastrophe occurs, like your daughter's, and then you should try to drag the least amount of misery forward that you can. Once you recover from your grief. something meaningful. The boat that will take you through the storm, right? When you batten down the hatches. But there's more. It isn't even that. It isn't even a meaningful, engaged life will see you through the catastrophe. But there's the other part of it too, which is don't be thinking that your errors aren't linked to hell. Because they are. If you look at what happened in the 20th century, it isn't top-down evil leader manipulating innocent masses. That's not it. It's the moral failings of every single individual. Unwilling to say their truth, unwilling to act out what they know to be right, that accumulate and produce the catastrophic state. And so when you're fussing about with your life, when you're not manifesting your potential, when you're falsifying your speech and your actions in the service of short-term expedience, you are working to bring about hell on earth. And that's true. It's true literally. I suspect it's also true metaphorically. And that's a real truth, man. When you get the literal and the metaphorical working at the same time, it's like, that's real. So it isn't just that you have to fix up yourself so that, you can have a better life. It's like, who cares about you? You have to fix up your life, because if you don't, every time you make a mistake that you know to be a mistake, you are leading the world toward hell. And I believe that. I think it's true.
You take 10 admirable people and you pull out someone who's meta-admirable, and that's a hero. That becomes a religious figure across time. That becomes a savior, a messiah across time, as we conceptualize what the ideal person is. And we've been in the West, here's how we figured it out. We said the ideal person, the ideal man, is the person who tells the truth. The truth.